What's up, Andy? How we doing?
Good. How you doing, Jimmy?
Things are good over here. I just wanted to hop on quick with you and chat a little bit about IT band syndrome. I know that this is a common one for a lot of runners. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, we see a bunch. I think some of the things that I think about are just making sure we're differentiating between IT band and any other things that could potentially cause lateral knee pain. So
Yeah.
we can talk a little bit about that going forward, just from a diagnostic and treatment standpoint. But
Yeah, definitely. The more I look into it, obviously it's tricky though, because the IT band itself it's connective tissue, right? So it's not necessarily the IT band that could be the problem. It could be muscles that feed into the IT band, right? What are your thoughts about that?
yeah, so just anatomically speaking, IT band originates, starts up in the hip. It comes off the glute max, glute med, gluteus maximus, gluteus medius,
Mhm.
and our tensor fascia lata. Our those fascial fibers kind of form the origin of the IT band, and then how most people know of it, it's just a very thick fibrous band of tissue that runs down the lateral part, the outside part of our leg, so along our vastus lateralis, our quad muscle, and then the insertion or the connection point at the bottom is part of our lateral tibial condyle, which is called Gerdy's tubercle. So it moves around a little bit when we bend our knee, moves around a little bit when we move our hip. So it's not necessarily a contractile tissue like a muscle where it physically shortens and lengthens based on what we're trying to do with it, but it can definitely add or reduce tension based on what the muscles that do start the fascia. It can definitely be impacted by that. So
So with it being impacted by that, it kind of like when you're running, it stores and then almost releases energy. Say that that's right or no?
I don't think of it as much like that. Like that's a bit more like an Achilles tendon or patella tendon. I think of it more as just like it's like a lateral stabilizer. So it's more of an inert tissue. So we're not it's not going through a like contract stretch cycle like we see in a muscle. I think it passively just gets stretched during things. So I think of it more as a like a support structure versus um, a big propulsion component of how we move
Okay.
in that regard.
So it kind of just keeps things connected instead of actually like being a driving force of the movement.
Sure. Yep. Stabilize. You think what's the main, especially gluteus medius, and TFL. I mean, those are where we're looking to try to stabilize the hip laterally and provide some form of um, pelvic control at that point, which allows us to move more efficiently through gait by not dipping pelvis or those type of things. So
That makes sense. And so like when you see a bunch of athletes rolling their IT band, would you say that that's something that they should be doing, or do you think they should be targeting those hip muscles that you're talking about?
yeah, I think everybody talks about their IT rolling their IT band is like the most painful thing in the world. Um, I would be pretty comfortable saying, I don't know what the data says behind this, that we're feeling more from our lateral quad when we're doing that. So our vastus lateralis, our outside quad muscle that runs right underneath. Um, I
Okay.
think it's down to the misconception that like unless we hold a very, very long stretch for a very, very long time, like deforming the IT band or adding length to it is not likely happening on a stretch that we do. That being said, we can stretch the tensor fascia lata TFL muscle. We can manipulate that. We can manipulate the glute med. the glute max maybe a bit with a foam roller, change some of the neural tone associated with that. But I don't think that a foam roller is changing the length or the malleability of our IT band. No, I don't think that happens.
That's interesting. That it's probably the quad muscle, that lateral region of the quad muscle, that's people are screaming about. You
Yeah.
know, so I guess like what people probably want to know is, well, if rolling your IT band is not really maybe the answer to try and like help with IT band syndrome, um, what approaches would there be? From what I was looking up and kind of checking out was that you can increase. Well, you tell me if I'm wrong. Like the capacity of the IT band to handle load, right? Because it's a stabilizer that you're talking about, and there's certain things that we could potentially do to strengthen that stabilizer through exercises that target the muscles that are around it and maybe challenge it a little bit on that lateral side, or you try and like manage the pain, right? By maybe changing things a little bit with your running stride or your technique, right? Would you say that
Yeah.
those two uh, targets would be helpful?
Yeah. I mean, I think with any running injury, we're trying a couple things is to manage the load through the area that's being stressed. So that can be done by a variety of ways. That can be like a decrease in mileage, a change in foot strike, a which I would not do haphazardly, and maybe a change in some of the support, like we talk about, if we work our way back up the IT band and where it originates, like we talked about, those glute muscles, the TFL, we think about their action. If we can maybe increase the muscle sufficiency there by adding some strength into those areas, then maybe we could reduce, if we're talking about like what we typically associate with IT band syndrome being lateral or outside knee pain. Sure, maybe we could redistribute some of that force down the chain a little bit by getting a bit stronger proximally up in the hip. So those are three things we could definitely adjust for to accommodate some of the pain that could be associated with it. Did that answer your question?
Yeah, that's like right on point. Like, so some examples of that could be like, what do you think about like weighted marches? Kind of marching with dumbbells on the side to kind of stay, to challenge the stabilizer um, in the hip.
Yeah.
Could help with the gait strength as well. Your
Mm-hmm.
opposite oblique. You can go double or you can go single if you really want to kind of get the core involved. Because you have to try and really, keep those hips even without like tipping over towards
Mm-hmm.
the weight side, right? Of course, split squats are always a good one, like controlled, slow split squats, load those appropriately. I'm a big fan of mixing up the location of the load. So, like, goblet, hold with a dumbbell, um, ipsilateral or contralateral sides, just to mix it up, and then
Yeah.
progressing to two and, one in each hand. Um, but what I really like a lot, especially when it comes to uh, the squat form, is kind of like the hip external rotation exercises, like maybe with the band, like where you're just really trying to externally rotate the hip from those muscles that you're talking about, glute medius specifically, to like almost like pull the ground apart with your feet without actually moving your feet and just engaging the outsides of that hip. So you can do things like laterally marching, you do things split squat, work some core engagement, you can do some external rotations at the hip. Those three kind of come to my mind when it comes to expanding the capacity of the IT band to do its job, right? Strengthen the muscles
Yeah.
around it so that that stabilizer. So dog's going crazy. So that stabilizer is better at what it's supposed to be doing.
Yeah, yeah, it's great. I mean, I think all that's like really, really good stuff. It's amazing how tired you can get if you just stand up and you keep your like your shoes on and you just try to separate your feet against the ground without moving. If you just hold that for a minute, how tired like the outside of your hips can get, just like you were talking about. So like that's a great way. Like when both our feet are on the ground, we're a heck of a lot more stable at our pelvis because we've got two levels of support below us. But yeah, all your unilateral stuff, especially where the weight is, shifting around, like to keep our pelvis level when we are standing on one leg, we have so. That very much depends on the conditioning of the person that you're dealing with, the goals they have. If you're just doing like a quiet stance, or if you're doing some of the split squats or single leg squats, or a variety of stuff, hip hikes. I mean, there's all kinds of stuff we can manipulate. But yeah, unilateral work is it's fairly sports specific, depending on how you're moving with it, and it definitely helps that structure of the lateral hip, which goes in to support the IT band as well. So
For sure. Nice. Now, when it comes to, so those are some ways that you can, like we said, increase the capacity of the IT band to do its job. So that could be one way by strengthening the muscles around it.
I would think of it more as we're trying to not necessarily increase the capacity, because the IT band's not going to get necessarily bigger, stronger. We're trying to increase the capacity of the muscles that help support the IT band to decrease the force production down the IT down the IT band, if that makes sense.
Yeah. In my mind, I'm thinking that it's in conjunction with those muscles. So it's
Yeah,
like
you're right.
it's an extension of them. So that when I
Yeah,
say what I mean, but you're right, yeah, to make sure that it's known that like that's not the actual target. It's
right.
it's being impacted by the target, by what you're targeting, right?
Yeah,
So it's an association with those hip muscles.
yeah. I
Then,
think semantics is kind of what we're saying. I mean, we can
yeah,
say it either way,
yeah.
but that's just the way my mind works.
Although I think it's more. I think people think they're like my IT band's tight, like my IT band's worn out. It's my IT band that's the problem, and that's their focus.
Mm-hmm.
And then they roll and they feel it and it hurts, and they think that that's doing something, but it's actually the quad like you're talking about. And it's like once they start, say they roll it and they think they feel better, it's probably to give their quad a little bit of relief, but they're still not hitting those actual muscles that need to be addressed. So it's like can feel like we're beating a dead horse when we talk about the difference of is it the hip muscles or is it the IT band? But I think pushing that point is important because moving well and then moving often, right, is kind of like who said that? I think Mike Boyle says that. He's a sports strength coach. I love that because the more you know how the body moves, the more you can kind of address the right areas and the quicker you can get out of pain, right?
100%.
Now we're talking about you had mentioned like foot strike or technique or other things like that that could help. Um, what are your thoughts about like increasing your tempo to widen your stance?
Increasing
Well,
cadence or
cadence.
cadence, steps per minute.
Yeah.
Is that, yeah, okay. So I think, yeah, so we have to be careful with those things, but I do feel like if we look at just the areas of our body that we're stressing on cadence. The lower the cadence, so if we're running at a slower, um, like a like we're having less steps per minute, that tends to be associated with a little bit more force produced at the knee. So that's
Mhm.
patellofemoral, that could be IT band. We tend to see a little bit more time on the ground, so that could provide some added stress um, to the knee, just because we have a little bit more time for it to flex and extends, which allows the IT band to move a bit at that outside of the knee. Um, and it also requires then, if we're on the ground longer, then we need a bit more of a contraction of our hip muscles to
Mhm.
stabilize our pelvis. So that could add an element of fatigue versus if we have a higher cadence, we tend to see a bit more force generated through the calf Achilles, which is a bit what we talked about a couple weeks ago,
Right.
which people associate with having a bit more efficiency. That comes with a big asterisk saying don't go changing your cadence drastically without talking to somebody, just because shifting force from one spot to another doesn't always work out great. If your
Right.
calf Achilles area is not used to being, stressed like it is during running at a higher cadence, then you're setting yourself up for potential problems there as well. So
Yeah. So that's key when it's sorry, I think I had somebody knocking there for a second, but I'll have to go check it out. That's a key point. Like the asterisk is, depends on the person, right? It depends. You don't want to shift the force or the tension to another area that could be problematic, you know. But it could, in a perfect world, maybe widen the stance a bit so that your gait's a little stronger. What do you think about that?
when you say widen stance, when you mean like, can
So
you
like
mean,
when you're increasing your cadence, you're increasing your steps per minute, right? So
yeah,
then it kind of squares things up a little bit more. Whereas when
yeah,
you're stretching longer, you could be hitting more mid, but more proximal, right? Right, more midline, which then
okay,
could be towards the stressors on the knees that you're talking about. Maybe a little knee valgus, maybe a little bit of movement in the IT band,
yeah,
more time on the ground. So it's kind of like, say you're doing, in my mind, I'm not a big time runner or anything, but like say you're doing hip external rotations with the band standing, pulling the ground apart, like we were talking about a second ago. You're kind of like widening up your hips, right, to strengthen
okay,
your. So then, like when you start to increase your cadence or increase your foot strike or your tempo, it's less time on the ground, right? Which then could, maybe I view it as like train tracks, like your train tracks from your hips to your hips to your shoulders, where maybe you're a little bit more aligned on those train tracks, which means that the gait is a little bit more squared off instead of maybe getting a little more rotation in the hips or a little thoracic movement, which then you're striking a little bit more inside those train tracks, which could send jolts of force through the body in areas that might hurt you. I don't know. What are your thoughts?
yeah. I mean, I don't think I've never really, and it's an interesting question. I'd have to go honestly back and look this up. Like, I've never thought much in terms of like width, like definitely a foot strike width. I know you don't want to like have a heavy crossover pattern um, with with gait, like where your one foot's. I mean, but generally speaking, I don't think much in terms of the width of foot strike. I feel like people figure that stuff out as they go. But yeah, a faster cadence definitely um, would do some of those other things that you're talking about, and we're hoping for um, in terms of ground reaction force, time on ground.
Uh-huh.
Does that make sense? Yeah,
Yeah, yeah.
I'm just not super familiar. Yeah. That being said, like if we like if I'm changing cadence in somebody, which is usually somewhere down the continuum, like if we're talking about a continuum of somebody coming in with lateral knee pain and what are we doing? Generally, we're starting with some of that hip strength, the stuff that you're talking about, which is fantastic. I do I do want to have a steady base of that. Also have them moving through some kind of like running base form. That could be a bilateral squat at first, just something that involves the knee flexion when you need, or marching. And then once we've established that increased strength, that increased muscle sufficiency, then we can move to towards more of a, I call them poke the bear exercises, where single leg squatting hurts, or if those like split squat hurts or lunging hurts, we can start moving into that a little bit. So we're stressing the area that's a little painful, to try to build tolerance to that. And then I would move towards cadence. So how do we
Right.
adjust? If we're running at 150, 160 steps per minute, maybe we want to increase that 2 to 5% per run or per week, to just slowly accommodate new force there. So not only have we created proximal strength and tolerance to noxious movement, now we've change the dynamic of how we're recruiting these muscles while we're running, and trying to make them even more fatigue resistant and pain resistant. So that
But
was a
yeah,
long way to maybe answer what you were saying. Um, so
sorry, spaced out there. What did you say? I blacked out. No,
yeah, that's right. Yeah.
no, 100%, 100%. I think that you focus on strengthening the muscles first around the hip, and then like as you progress, and the runner's more at a, not novice level, maybe even past more advanced level, then you can start talking about like, messing around with like increasing cadence or foot strike or anything like that. You don't want to lead with that because it's not, you don't know how to operate. You don't know how to drive the car yet, right? That
Mm-hmm.
way. Um, I'm curious. So I'm trying to keep things more broad, but like for a second, I want to go into a little more narrow. I'm curious about what you said. I liked it. The width of your foot strike. You were talking about that for just a quick second. Like, your foot impacting the ground, or your,
Ah,
yeah. So like, do you think that when you say that, you mean like your foot being like flat on the ground?
the like the where your foot hits the ground, is that,
Yeah,
are we
yeah. Where
like
you
for
impact,
heel strike versus forefoot striking? Is
or you're talking about like your width of your foot strike. So
oh,
like now, do you think that's in correlation with the hip control?
I don't think width of the foot strike, I don't think is that. It's more of like anterior, posterior, where it is, what part of your foot's hitting the ground,
The heel or ball of your
the
foot?
heel or your forefoot or midfoot. I don't
Yeah.
I don't know. Width would be more of like a midfoot, like maybe you pronation, you're hitting the midfoot's hitting the ground a little
Do
bit more, but
do runners like to hit more midfoot, or like to hit more like, or does it depend?
it very much depends. Yeah, yeah.
So
Yeah.
is heel strike like something that you're trying not to do a lot of, or does that also like
Man,
slip
that's a very loaded question. Yeah.
for
It's
another time? For
it's
another time.
it's a great question. And I think the big thing is, people read things and people see things and people hear about different types of shoes, and people think that we've really, for a period of time there, we really moved from like, hey, rear foot's bad, run more forefoot. And there's probably something to that to an extent, but if everybody that runs rear foot moves to forefoot, I guarantee you we're not going to have like universal success there. So the
Got it.
idea is we have less ground reaction force, less force coming back into our body from the ground
Yeah.
if we land a bit more forefoot. That being said, there's a lot of
Yeah.
people who are wildly efficient that land rear foot, and they can run very fast, they can run very well, and they can be very injury resistant.
I'm curious.
It's a variable thing, and it's something we have to be very careful about changing in people, because it could set you up a lot of issues if you do make those changes without proper guidance.
Well, people are different, right? So they got different arches in their feet. They get different. They're flat footed. Or I feel like 90% of my midfoot doesn't touch the ground. So my arches are just so high. And then also taking into account like how much foot proprioception do they have? How much foot training or awareness are they bringing in? It's like if you just switch them to forefoot from heel strike willy nilly, then it's kind of like you're not doing them any favors. You're just changing you're just kind of probably trading one source of pain with another because you're going to be activating in a different way, right? If, like you said, because they're going to be less, they're not going to be on the ground as long, right? So like if they're weak in their Achilles tendon or if they're weak in their calf muscle or whatever, like that's all at play, and then it travels up through the hips too. So it's so interesting being a swimmer and hearing more about you land animals. It definitely it's interesting, like these details, and I love it. But I think that in a nutshell, starting with the hip complex and addressing the muscles around the hip complex, one of the two major complexes, just like swimming, if there's something going on with the arm, like we're going to start at the shoulder complex. You know what I mean? So it's like, it brings it back to home base is usually the best, starting point. And then you improve your operation, you strengthen the muscles you need to strengthen. And then we can talk about things as they get more distal. So I love it, dude. I don't want to take up too much more of your time. And I do want to save a couple of these topics for our next chat because it sounds like that you're a wealth of knowledge when it comes to that heel strike or that forefoot strike.
Yeah.
Dropping a
Try to
loaded
think about it
question.
a lot. I think it's an ever evolving topic, and there's definitely people who know a lot more about it than me. So I'm just trying to digest the information as I get it and best relay it to y'all and the people I see here at studio as I can. So
You guys who are in Knoxville, Studio Physical Therapy with Andy Praxis, it's the place to be at the long run. He's cranking it. He's doing a great job. So Andy, thanks for hopping on, and I'm looking forward to our next conversation.
looking forward to it, Jimmy. Thanks a lot.
All right, talk to you soon.